Okay, we are in James chapter 5. Last week, we ended up really in verse 10, but there's some things I want to come back to, and that is concerning this message to the rich, which is at the beginning of this chapter. It's verses 1 to 6, and as we made mention last week, that what James says, I take to be absolutely true when he talks about the behavior of some that he is addressing, obviously not all, but when he's addressing some who will be reading this message, that they have done these things because he says they've done it. All right? Now he starts off, come now you rich, weep and howl, for your miseries are come upon you. Your riches are corrupted and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you, and you will against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. That is the gold and silver, the corrosion, and have heaped up treasures in the last day. Then he has these accusations that he puts out, and I take these accusations as very accurate and very literal. And while one may think surely Christians would not be doing things like this, let's not be naive. If you have those of Israel in the past who were doing things like this, then you can have people in the present who are among the righteous doing things like this. All right? They hold their seat with the righteous, but they're not so righteous. And they may have a claim or evoke the name of Christ and think they're going to be okay with Him, but they have a double standard here, or they're living a double life of having one thing as a show on Sunday and then living their lives completely different way. And notice what he says, indeed the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the reapers have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. That's the Lord of hosts. And this language is, as we pointed out last week, though we didn't go back and show it, matches many things in the Old Testament. And to me, Amos in particular. Amos going up into Israel, and he's addressing some very wealthy people in Israel, these rich elite people who they oppress the poor, and they're doing all these things. Now, if that can happen in the days of Amos, it can happen in the days in the first century, in the days of James. It can also happen today. But here we have those who've kept back the wages, and this is the scary part. The Lord of hosts, as he says, the Lord of hosts, he doesn't, in saying Lord of hosts, denotes his power, that he hears their cry. And that's scary. They're crying out, in case you didn't know, they're crying out, and the Lord of hosts hears them. And you need to know that. Now it comes further than that. Verse 5, you have lived your life on the earth in pleasure and luxury, and have fattened your hearts in the day of slaughter. Psalm 119:70, their heart is as fat as grease, but I delight in your law. Also Amos 4:1, come, hear this word, you cows of Bashan. And this in particular, where Amos is speaking, are extremely rich ladies, extremely rich women. These cows of Bashan, who are in the mountains of Samaria, who oppress the poor, who crush the needy, who say to their husbands, bring wine, let us drink. All right? It's just this cavalier kind of attitude, this careless kind of attitude of doing all these wicked things. You're oppressing the poor. You are victimizing people who have no power whatsoever, and it's just a casual thing. Bring the wine. This is a time of luxury. Now, verse 6, it escalates even further. You have condemned, you have murdered the just, and this is what we want to return to. He does not resist you. He does not resist you. Now, last week we asked the question, who is he? Who's the he? And it is the one that's being condemned. It's the one that's being murdered, condemned and murdered, and that is the just. That would also be in this discussion, the laborer, the reaper, the just, all of these together, and they cannot resist you. Now, if we go back to James chapter 2 and verse 6 and 7, we see where he says that the rich are the ones that oppress you, the rich are the ones that take you to court, they're the ones that blaspheme the holy name by which you are called. Okay, they're the ones doing it. And you don't want to be like that, and nor do you want to show preferential treatment to them. Show everybody preferential treatment. Show everybody the treatment that they are due, which is exactly what he's speaking in James chapter 2. But here, he says, you've condemned, you've murdered the just. You've condemned, it would be, you've thrown them into court. You've murdered the just. It could be that this person was, it was a capital offense that they weren't guilty of, but it's not that the rich man necessarily did the murdering, but set it to where they would be killed, either by the courts or some other means. And now, here is the message. Here, James is speaking to people in the church who are doing this, and it's obviously he's speaking to people in the church. And of course, it is to Jews. We know that from the beginning. I take that very literal. To the 12 tribes that have been dispersed. We have that in just to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. That's chapter 1, verse 1. That's who it's addressed to. And now, here is this message. Though someone has withheld the wages, though someone has condemned and murdered the just, here is a message to them too. It's a message to them too. Weep, howl, all right, laying up these, you've heaped up treasures in the last day, and yeah, those treasures aren't going to be good. That's going to be the reward, and the reward is not going to be good. It's going to be horrible. And there isn't in my mind a human word that can express the pain and the agony of hell. At least not now. Those that are cast into hell, they will probably come up with the word. But until then, there is no word on earth that properly, completely describes that. We have numerous words that are used in the New Testament, but I think that how horrid it is, and the eternal pain and anguish, and it never ends, that there's no word to express that adequately, not as it exists, and no language on earth can do it, not in my mind. But let's now go on to look at he does not resist you. Why? Because he can't resist you. The just cannot stop you. The just cannot stop the laborer, the reaper, the just are powerless. They're powerless. You're withholding their wages. They're powerless to get their wages. You take them into courts, they're powerless to stay out of courts. You murder them, they're powerless in all of this. They can't resist you. And that is part of the delight, I know it is, of those who are in that situation, because you can't resist them. If they want something, they will take it. It's like with Ahab and Jezebel. Ahab wanted the land that Naboth owned, and he was willing to pay for it. And he was willing to pay a good price. And Naboth wasn't willing. And Jezebel said, "You're the king. You take what you want. You're the king. What's stopping you? You're going to pay for it." So he doesn't want to buy it. She turns the wheels, and Naboth is killed. And she doesn't. I mean, she doesn't wield the knife. She doesn't do it. That's done for her. And she's doing it for Ahab. All of that, Naboth could not resist that. There was nothing he could do. It was all set up by very powerful people, and he's just a victim. And Naboth could do nothing to keep that from occurring. Nothing. Now, we come to verse 7. And we got into this at the end of last class. "Therefore be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and latter rain. You also be patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand." Okay? Now, here's this comparison between the farmer having the patience for the harvest and the patience we're supposed to have for the coming of the Lord. And he says it's at hand. And it is at hand. But exactly what day? I don't know. I don't know what day that would be. Now, we're to have that patience that takes us all the way to that point, all the way to our death on this earth. If our death comes before the Lord returns, our patience has to take us to that point. Now, verse 9, "Do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door." Now we come to verse 10, where we left off last week. "My brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example for suffering and patience." Now, if we go back to Hebrews chapter 11, we'll see some things. That you do have individuals here who went through a lot. They went through a lot. And as we made mention when we were in the book of Hebrews, that not everybody went through the same trials. By no means. No means. That Daniel's life is very different from Moses' life. And you have Abraham's life is different from Moses or Daniel. Does this make God unfair? No. Not at all. In each one's life, they show going through trials. Going through trials that God expected them to get through. He expected it. And now we just go to verse 32. "And what more shall we say? What more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and also David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trials of mockings and scourgings, yes, and of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise." Okay, now what was that promise? They didn't receive the promise here upon the earth. The promise of the Christ, which all of these predate Him coming to the earth, the Christ would come well after their lifetime. Even the last one we could see in this, which I think is David, is the last one who would be named by name in all of this, that the Christ would have come many centuries after David. And someone like Abraham, who it predates most in here, not Noah, not Abel, not Enoch, obviously, but with someone like Abraham, Abraham had received a land promise, but it was to his descendants, and also the promise of the Messiah, which is going to come considerably later after the land promise has been given. But they had faith that the promise would be kept. They had faith in it. Now, we notice all the things that they went through. There is patience that accompanied the faith. Obviously, Hebrews 11 is on the faith that they had and what they did because of the faith that they had. And it required patience in all of that. In all the things that we just read, there was patience that was required. And so coming back to James, he says, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. And they did suffer. And they did have to have patience. They had to. And with some, someone like, with going in the New Testament now, someone like Stephen. Stephen died not long after the church was established. He's made a martyr. So while we see him being martyred there in Acts chapter 8 and the things that he says, and the mercy actually that he has on those who are killing him. He has mercy on them while they are killing him. And he was not one that had to have as much patience as someone like Paul or someone like Peter, because they lived longer on the earth. Their trials were longer. And they went through a lot more than Stephen had to go through. A lot more. And how many times did Paul say he had been beaten? From the Jews and also from the Romans. And you have being shipwrecked. You have all these things that occurred in his life. And there is patience that he shows in all that. There's a patience. And we don't know how long our life is going to be, but as it goes, we have to have patience every step of the way. Every step of the way. It is easy on good days. It's not so easy on bad days. And bad days can come in many forms. It can come in many forms of just sheer aggravation to fear, to of anger. It can come in many forms. And there has to be patience in all of this. In Luke 11:51, Jesus was talking about the history that had been among the Jews. History that had been actually among the righteous and the wicked. And he says this, so it's Luke 11:51, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, whom perished between the altar and the temple. Talking about the righteous who had been martyred. They had been martyred. And they're showing themselves being righteous all the way up to the point in which they died. Now, when James tells us in this that we are to take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience, he means expect to have that kind of patience. And expect to have this kind of suffering in your life. Expect it, that it could very well happen. But once again, not everybody's life, not everybody's story is the same. Moses had lots of trials that he had to go through. He had lots of trials. But compare his life to the life of Jeremiah. Jeremiah had it pretty rough. While Moses is called to be a prophet at age 80, and he would have had, obviously he had trials prior to that. Jeremiah is called early in life. He's called early and I can't give you an age on that, but don't say that I am a youth. Don't think that just because you are young that God can't call you. But Jeremiah goes through a very rough time through his life. Ezekiel did too. Ezekiel, God said he was going to have to prepare Ezekiel to deal with the hard-headedness that he was going to have to come across. And there would be Israelites, there would be Jews that would oppose him. And of course, while Jeremiah is left in Jerusalem, they are seriously opposing him. They're throwing him into prison. But there is a patience that is to be expected. And that everybody's story is different. Moses was never thrown into prison. He was never thrown into a lion's den. But he was expected to go through all the trials that he went through. And there was a different time and a different mission, all according to what God needed from them, and each one doing what they were called to do when they were called to do it. Now, let's go back we come now to verse 11, and here we have Job being mentioned. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure. You have heard of the preservance. Perseverance, thank you. I don't know how that didn't. Yeah, perseverance. You've heard of the perseverance of Job and seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. Now, there was an end intended by the Lord. He had to persevere throughout that entire book. There's only a short point in that book where things are going very well for him. And then he's put in a test. And it was severe. He lost everything. Everything. And all at once is for maximum impact. And Satan wanted it for maximum impact. And everything came simultaneously. And everyone could recognize that this would be Job, this would be Job's wife, this would be Job's friend, recognized there is no explanation for this naturally. There's no explanation for it. This had to be an act of God. It had to have been, because there is all these things happening over a series of years, okay, matter of coincidences, don't know, these things just sort of happen, but happening all at once, no way. And that was hitting him like a train. And it hit his wife, same way. She's lost just as much as he did, though we don't have any indication that she's covered head to toe in boils. He is. And notice that there is an end intended by the Lord for a better day for Job and for a stronger Job. While Job is described as righteous at the first part of the book, he is stronger by the end of the book because of all that he went through, plus what he learned in it. What he learned. Because there is a point at the end of the book where it is a conversation between God and Job, and God asking questions, and how do you think that you are wiser? How do you think that somehow you know what justice is? How do you think that you know that where this has come from and where this is going, or anything about this? You don't know. You don't know anything, really. And as it turns out, Job is a much wiser man at the end, and that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. And we come to Job 42 and 12. Now the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. So when all was done and everything was complete, we see where Job has a better day still than what he had beforehand. And here is the testing that is done. And we've used this illustration before, and it's a good illustration. To temper metal. First off, why do you temper metal? You temper metal so it'll be hard. Metal can be, we can think, well, all metal is hard. Well, not really. Steel has a hardness to it, but it can be harder if it's been tempered. It can be harder. It can be a harder bit of steel if it has been tempered. Same thing with iron. Same thing with other metals. If they're tempered, then they can be more useful. And how it's done is by taking, once you've shaped the object, whatever it is, sword or whatever it is that you've got, once you've made it into the shape that you want, it's put into the coals and it is made glowing. And that's going to be extremely, if the metal could feel pain, that's going to be extremely painful. Then it goes right into water. That too is going to be extremely painful. But what comes out at the other end is something that is much harder, much more durable than what you had to begin with. Now, for us, the human soul has to go through something similar to become stronger. If we are in this life just to be spoiled, we won't advance very far as individuals. Our character will be flat. No one likes. Do you like being around spoiled children? I don't. I don't like being around spoiled children. And I make a list of the ways I could correct this child if this child were mine. And it's like one preacher said, it was so funny. I don't even know what his sermon was about, and I remember this about it. He said, when was the last time you were at the checkout in Walmart and didn't want to hit some child behind you? But he was talking about children that are they're not being corrected. They're not being disciplined. And no one wants to be around spoiled children. And if spoiled children continue, they grow up just like everybody else. And if they continue on that same path, they grow up physically, but if mentally and emotionally and in all those other ways, they don't grow any further, they don't mature any further, all you've got is just a bigger spoiled child who has more demands than he had when he was 3 years old. Okay? And no one wants to be around that type of person, including and especially God. He does not. He does not want us developing that way. Therein are these tests to where we develop as individuals and we develop stronger. And those that go through things like Job, God knew what Job could take. And God knows what each one of us can take. And He's not about to put us into something that we cannot bear. And that comes in as handy knowledge. When you're in something and you think, I can't bear this any further, just know, yeah, you can. Otherwise, it wouldn't be given to you. You can. Obviously, you're stronger than you think you are. And you have a higher capacity to handle hardships than you think you do. If this is on you, you can handle it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be on you. It wouldn't be on you. And there is a reason why we can look up to someone like Job and what he went through, or someone even in our own lifetime who's gone through a lot and continues to be faithful. We can look up to someone like that as having an extraordinary amount of strength, that they have gone through so many hardships and they continue on. And there's just going to be this matter of testing that's going to naturally occur, and persecutions that are going to occur, because wicked people are going to do wicked things. There are going to be persecutions that occur, and we have to have the patience through it all. Now, let's go to verse 12. And this is, he's returning back to the tongue, is what he's doing, which, as we have discussed, actually, I think from when we began this, is that the book of James has several topics that he returns back to. And it's kind of mixed through. Faith is being one of them. The rich being one of them. Tongue is another. And but he says this, verse 12. But above all, my brethren, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no, no, lest you fall into judgment. All right? James just quoted Christ. We made mention of this when we were talking about Martin Luther hating the book of James and what he said about the book of James. That the book of James had absolutely or extremely little knowledge of the Christ. Very little. Now, he said that. I didn't say that. He said that. And James, not only is James able to call him Lord, but James just quoted the Sermon on the Mount. James just quoted Matthew chapter 5, verse 37. Let your yes be yes and your no, no. He just quoted Christ. So he knows something, obviously. Actually, Martin Luther would have been well to have learned more. And he just didn't, as we pointed out back then, his was more of a reaction against man, a reaction against the papacy and the abuses there, than it was obedience to God. Okay? Obviously, there was going to be a reaction because of the abuses that had been going on in the papacy and among the clergy for many years. But if you're going to return to the truth, it can't be as a reaction of that. It's got to be you return to the truth. You don't just swing the pendulum all the way to the other side. So the pendulum has to be over here. Well, let's see where it's supposed to be. Where does God set it? We can't just swing it all the way to the other side as a reaction to what we've suffered through. Go to what God wants. And here, let's get to what James just said in this. And it goes down to this. If you say you're going to do something, you don't need to swear, as some might do on my mother's grave, or whatever someone might say. You don't need to say that. Let your yes be yes. If I tell you yes to you want me to do something, I say yes, I'll do it. And then someone else comes along and asks me to do something, and I swear that I'm going to do that. If I have to swear and make an oath and all that I'm going to do that. All right, what does that mean? To you, I just gave you yes. I didn't swear on it. Therefore, I'm not obligated to do it. As the Pharisees and lawyers and others were trying to do. If I swear on the temple, I don't have to keep it. But if I swear on the gold that's in the temple, then I have to keep it. Okay. It was all that nonsense that was there. And let your yes be yes and your no be no. If it's yes, that's all you need to say. If it's no, that's all you need to say. You don't need anything else to it. Nothing else is needed. Let that be that. There doesn't need to be anything else. Now, we come to this really, getting to the last part of this chapter and the last part of the book. And this concerns prayer. And we can't go through all of this today. Matter of fact, I need to be able to have much more time than what we have today. But let's just begin in verse 13. Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing psalms. This is your situation. If you are suffering, this is your situation. You pray. Let him pray. But the thing is that if you're not suffering, you still ought to be praying. But if you're suffering, there's the answer to it. The answer is prayer. And I will say this, and it is not a brag in the least, but there have been situations that where it has been a group together, situations that it's a very bad situation, and there are different things being said of what can we do to resolve this? What can we do to get through this? And the answer is, let's take a month, because we had that much time. Let's take a month, and we are going to fervently pray about this. That's what we're going to do. That is going to be our response. We're going to fervently pray for this. And then at the end of the month, let's see what happens. And as this turns out, it was resolved. It did get resolved. And the primary means of getting it resolved was prayer. And now that didn't mean no one had to do anything else. It didn't mean that. It's just that because actions were done, but it was done in a very providential way to where it did resolve itself and resolved itself quite cleanly. And it was in prayer that we all pray about this. This is what we're going to do. Pray that it gets resolved, or pray that we have the wisdom to know what to do. Pray that all this can be handled, and can be handled by the Lord Himself. However He's going to do it. Just let that be done. And in this section, He speaks about fervent prayer. And we're going to talk about that hopefully next week. But for this week, we have run out of time. I appreciate everybody being with us. And once again, hope to see everybody here next week. Thank you.